You're listening to the I Love You Keep Going podcast with George Haas. For more information, please visit our website at www.mettagroup.org. That's www.mettagroup.org.
So welcome everybody. This is I Love You Keep Going. It is Thursday, October 17th at 7:35 p.m. Pacific Daylight Time. And we're rapidly approaching the holiday season, which I like to kick off with Halloween. But then we have what we used to call in the 12-step rooms, the threefold disease of the holidays, Thanksgiving, Christmas, and New Year's. And the involvement of ourselves with family, if you still have relationships with family, and I have to admit that we do have a bias about attempting to repair or maintain and develop relationships with family. I think it's an important thing. This is not always possible, and you do have to be careful about it, particularly if you come from a background of sadistic abuse, then it's very challenging to try and maintain relationships. But if if you had hapless abuse, or you actually come from a family system that works okay, it's an important time of year. And I like to talk about the process of that as a kind of exploration where you return to the family scene and the players, and then you attempt to understand the family dynamic. So it's not simply returning into an unconscious experience of family, but returning with a very deliberate and conscious experience so that you can begin to understand the dynamics of the family system that you're from, so that you can begin to find a place where you can move into expressions of authenticity. I think one of the difficulties for people that come from challenging family environments is the abandonment of self in terms of inauthenticity. And at the same time, we have the question of consent. One of the things about intimate relationships is that you need to consent to the level of intimacy that you have, and other people also need to consent to the level of intimacy that they want to have with you. And in secure family systems, of course, this is already valued and already instructed, but in insecure and disorganized family systems, insecure family systems are more role-based. And so really what you have permission for is to present in the role that you're assigned. And in disorganized family systems, which are mainly formed around trauma bonding, the permissions are wildly violated if they're requested at all. And so it's important to begin to examine the family system that you come from, to begin to understand the dynamics of it so that you can find a way to be and retain your authenticity in the experience of the family. And at the same time, offer intimacy at a level that's agreeable to people. This may sometimes result in a relationship that feels superficial in comparison to relationships where you have more developed intimacy, but it is something to be able to see and understand as to why that's one of the things that the family system needs. And then, of course, if you grow up in a family system and you're assigned one of the family roles that you don't want anymore, negotiating yourself out of that role may or may not be so easy, because the balance of the family requires that everybody play their part. So, if you wanted, for instance, if you had the golden child role and you wanted to relinquish that, you probably could get some takers in the family that might pick it up. But if you were in the scapegoat role, you're going to have a very hard time persuading anybody else in the family that they should take that over. And at the same time, they're not going to want you to give it up because it's necessary to maintaining the balance in the family. So you can, of course, step out of the role and then not really take on another one and move in the direction of intimacy, which I think is a good idea. But it is often not celebrated by the other members of the family system, are counting on you to uphold the sort of homeostasis of the family system. Christian?
George, I'm curious, maybe you've seen this in people you've worked with, or like what actually happens to a family system that loses the kind of scapegoat person? Like,
Um,
to just step out of the whole thing.
Usually what happens is the family gangs up on somebody and insists that they take the role. So that's the most common outcome there. And the penalty for you is often to be expelled. You won't keep the role, so they expel you, but then they push it on to somebody else who has to take it, which is actually something that then can even open up a dialogue between you and the other sibling who ends up in that role, particularly if they've, a lost child, somebody who's in the lost child role might be willing to take on the scapegoat role because they get a lot more attention than they got in the lost child role. So it just depends on what your family system is. And then, of course, sometimes with the loss of that role, the family system itself tends to come apart, particularly as you get older and move into the different stages of life. If you marry and have children, or you find a job that's really compelling and you put most of your effort into that, and then participate less. Plus, in the U.S., we still have a fairly mobile society where people move distances, which also changes the dynamic quite a bit in the family system. And then it's the returning home to the gatherings. You're past your 20s, but do you remember what that was like? Do you still live near your family of origin, or do you live somewhere else? And then in your 20s, how much through the 20s did you return to the family routinely for holidays? And then when did you get a base that actually demanded your presence in the holiday celebrations, whatever they were? Did you abandon holidays? um, What was that like, negotiating the first time you didn't show for Christmas or Thanksgiving or Hanukkah or whatever religion you grew up in? But I wanted to talk about this in terms of the conditioning, and really to focus mainly on authenticity as the driver here, and talk about the mechanism that happens when we think of presenting ourselves authentically, but we're too frightened to do it. So that fearfulness is really the abandonment. I like to call it the abandonment terror, or the earthquake of abandonment terror, because it really does arise fairly suddenly. And the way that I chart it is, you have your authentic response to the experience of the present moment, which arises in the mind. And then in that, of course, that process of the way that we form reality. So we have the capacity to sense the object that can be sensed when there's contact. We have a consciousness of that sensing experience, that comes in from all of the senses. And also understand that mind is this selection process. We don't really take a thorough survey of everything that's happening in a neutral way. We take a highly curated selection of things that matter to us, and we just really ignore everything else. We gather in each moment a collection of these sense moments. They're evaluated for urgency. Do we need to get to this right now? Does it not matter if we get to it? Is there time for a pleasant experience? And then that sort of forms a queue of things that we attend to. And then it's compared to the perceptual database. And if there's a meaning thread that matches the gathering of the present moment, that whole meaning thread attaches to the experience of the present moment, and it rolls out into our conceptual reality of what's actually happening. So another way to put that is we live in the meaning that we assign to the experience that we're having of what's happening in the present moment. Does that make sense? Between ultimate reality, which is the pure sensing data, and the conceptual reality that we form, of course, mind states can insert themselves and distort the perception of things. And one of those is this abandonment terror that arises. If the authentic expression, because after we've made conceptual reality, the next thing that happens is the intention for the expression of that experience. And then we would take the action to express it. If we are frightened of being abandoned because of our authentic experience of the present moment, there's a spike of abandonment here that arises. And this is really what's also happening in that moment is the activation of the working model that you might express that experience to. So we have a working model of ourselves. We have a working model of other people. We have expectations of other people in terms of what they might find acceptable and what they might not find acceptable. And this comes from our conditioned response to them. If you think that the authentic expression that you would make would cause you to be abandoned, then there's a spike of abandonment here. And what arises in consciousness almost immediately in response to that is the inauthentic thing that you could say instead or express instead. And there you are. You have this moment of choosing, maybe. Maybe you have some choice in that. It depends on the intensity of the abandonment here. But if you push into the inauthentic expression, it immediately relieves the abandonment here. And the distortion in this is that you think that you are preserving the relationship by not expressing the authentic experience that you're having, when what it's really doing is undermining the relationship. Undermining your confidence that you won't be abandoned because you don't risk it. So you don't know whether you will or not, which creates an anxiety about. And that anxiety, depending on how limited you are in your authentic expression, could become ongoing in all areas. And then a little while later, you're angry. And so that abandonment terror turns into an anger, which is really driven by deprivation. One of the things that is really important to understand about early experience and just the nature of the human condition is that we want to feel seen and valued, and we want to know that we have an effect on the people that are around us. And if you're unwilling to express yourself authentically, if you're unwilling to be seen by anyone, there's a deprivation of being seen. But that also leads to this deprivation of having an effect on anything, right? The authentic effect. Because if you express yourself inauthentically, even if the people around you respond to that inauthentic expression, it doesn't satisfy that deep longing to be seen and to be acceptable, and also that deep longing to actually have an effect on the people that matter, the situations that matter to you. And so that anger comes out. So wouldn't it be a marvelous thing that I could just say all of that once, and then you would recognize, oh yes, I'll just be authentic from this moment on. No problem. The problem really is it depends on your family system and the how hard the conditioning was not to be authentic. This is something that's bitter to learn, something that none of us want to know, really. And it comes at us very early in life, this lack of acceptance in our natural, authentic expression, and then the conditioned response where we learn to adapt to the conditions we're in, and we learn to present ourselves in a way that will get some response uh, from our caregivers. And we all of us who are faced with this conundrum, abandon ourselves because the impulse for survival is more powerful than the impulse for authenticity. Is that making sense? Now, what do you have to do in order to come back into the experience of authenticity? One of the things that you have to do is to be able to recognize and experience both the authentic expression and the inauthentic expression, one, two, as they arise. You have to be able to recognize the abandonment terror. Depending on how far down the rabbit hole of inauthenticity you are, it would not be unusual not to know what the authentic response is because you don't have conscious awareness of it long enough to really understand it. And as soon you're conditioned that as soon as the abandonment terror arises, you go outward to the mind state of the other person, and you begin to try and figure out what it is that you need to say in order to feel that they would not abandon you. And so you're expressing it really in a way that isn't, the focus isn't on it being representative of your authentic experience. It's being, in some sense, you're taking care of the other person so that they'll take care of you. That's a very preoccupied loop. You present yourself, and why it isn't authentic is because you're not expressing your authentic thing. You're expressing something inauthentic in order for you to get the care that you want, if that loop is making sense. So it isn't a genuine impulse for communication. It isn't a genuine expression of care for the other person. It is, in fact, an inauthentic expression that is meant to implicitly elicit care from the other person. But then if they take it literally and provide the care you're actually asking for, it's not the care you want. And so you feel uncared for. Whereas if you had expressed authentically what it was, it's not that you get a guarantee that they'll respond to you, but you do have a better chance at them, at least if they do provide the care, it being the care that you wanted. Is that making sense? So the clarity is, this is my authentic response. And this is the abandonment terror. And if I can hold the experience of the abandonment terror, then I could make the authentic expression and see what happens. Of course, if they respond in a positive way to your authentic expression, it's reassuring. and you feel safe in response to that. Of course, if they don't, then you have the next moment of authenticity to express. And if you can work through the abandonment terror enough that you can again and again make an authentic expression, you have the possibility of building a sense of security, the sense of safety in your connection to someone else. Christian?
George, do you see this framing of making your sort of authentic expression as pertaining to like people that are in close relationship to you only, or is something that you think matters in some way for all possible relationships, even the really more distant ones?
Well, I think that if you relate the authentic expression with the uh, consent piece, then you can make an authentic expression in all circumstances that matches onto the level of consent that you have for an intimate expression. One of the things that you notice about secure people is that they make authentic expressions and they don't really have alternatives to that. They've never really had the need for an alternative to that, and they've never developed really a good capacity for inauthentic expression, so that they're easy to spot when when they're making an inauthentic expression. And it does, but they also don't see really the utility of the inauthentic expression, because in their experience, that's always the most expedient way to get what you want, to just declare it.
So if I might frame this maybe a particular way, and you can tell me if you think I'm way off. It's not that you give up on sort of white lies or I don't know. Yeah, something like white lies in certain situations, but
So we could back that up a step to good manners,
good manners, yeah, politeness,
politeness.
but that you don't commit yourself to things that actions that will build resentment as a result of the action that you just took.
Right. Resentment is a good line. If you're resenting somebody, you're flowing too much energy into the relationship for what you feel that you're getting back. And if you could adjust that with an authentic expression of that, you could probably bring it back into balance. But if you're frightened of being abandoned, if you express that, then you're back to these more implicit ways of trying to navigate a relationship.
All right, that's good to hear. So I want to take that as you granting me full permission to keep lying my ass off as I see fit.
Uh, I think I'm 100% confident I said the opposite of
Okay.
that.
I'm just messing with you. All right, I think that was helpful, yeah.
Yeah. Um, I wish it was so simple that all you had to do was navigate the abandonment terror. But actually, the abandonment terror is coupled to the terrible sadness. And we'll talk more about the terrible sadness next time. But the abandonment terror arises. It frightens you that if you express yourself authentically, you'll be abandoned. And so you abandon yourself by expressing something that you think the other person will find acceptable. And in that moment, when they find the inauthentic thing that you expressed inauthentically, you feel a sense of safety returning. But you don't really get the safety back. In fact, you don't really have the safety until you can present yourself authentically, and the other person delights in that or sticks around even for it. That's actually the experience that provides a sense of safety, that you've expressed yourself authentically, they have a good understanding of where you're coming from, and they stick around. That's the thing that provides the sense of safety. And until you do that, you never actually have confidence that if they found out what was really authentically true for you, that they would stick around, because you've never really tested them in that way. Is that making sense? Now, the different attachment strategies have different relationships to the abandonment terror, and it might be worth talking about that. Secure people tend to present themselves authentically because that's always been the thing that's been valued for them. I said this earlier, so they don't really have much of a sense or much of a strategy for inauthenticity. They limit the intimacy expression, and they have good facility to reveal or not reveal, because that's also something that they learned in childhood. They go slowly in the development of intimate trust, and they like people to demonstrate that they're trustworthy, and that's one of the ways that they don't put themselves at risk of overexposure, which is not true of insecure and disorganized people. They don't over reveal intimate things to other people until the other people have demonstrated their trustworthiness for it. So they don't get burned up the way that insecure and disorganized people do in over revealing things. They're sensitive to consent. They're sensitive to the consent that they give, and they're also sensitive to gaining consent of other people in these expressions. You ever say something like, we haven't really talked about this kind of thing before, but would you be open to talking about it? It's a request for consent. Or have you ever said, that's a little too personal. I think I'd like to hold back on that, which is an expression that you're not giving consent. And so if you're used to that kind of organization, you would expect people to accept your declarations of consent or refusal to give consent, and just those boundaries are okay. In insecure relationships, so dismissing or helplessly preoccupied relationships, the abandonment terror is more an expression of preoccupied attachment than it is dismissing attachment, because dismissing people suppress awareness of the emotion that they experience, which means they also suppress awareness of the abandonment terror. So they're more likely to experience the abandonment threat as a sense of being rejected than they would be frightened of abandonment. So, and they tend to be projective, and so that if they're frightened of being abandoned, they would accuse the other person of that rather than admit that they're not being authentic. You're abandoning me, Christian.
Sorry, can you clarify? They tend to accuse the other person of that. What's the that in that case?
Well, let's say that you have an agreement to be monogamous in the relationship, and you are having an extramarital affair, and then you imagine that your partner, or you sense that your partner is withdrawing from you, which would trigger the abandonment experience. But you would experience it as rejection, and then you would accuse them of having an affair. Is that making sense?
Yeah.
Because dismissing people are so self-oriented, if they're having an affair, they would imagine that their partner would also have an affair, because it's one of the things that they do, and They don't have much imagination beyond what they do. They're often teleological. There was in one of the trainings that we did, the husband and wife, conventional heterosexual couple. The husband would stop off at the newsstand on the way home from work and buy a bouquet of flowers on Fridays. And then one Friday he got to the florist and they were out of bouquets, and so he went home without the bouquet. And the wife accused him of no longer loving her. So the next week, he brought a bouquet on Wednesday and brought it home. And on Wednesday night, she accused him of having an affair, because why else would he bring flowers on a Wednesday? So the mentalizing gets a little dicey. Preoccupied people, on the other hand, dismissing people idealize also. So idealization is this process where you strip out all of the negative affect, all of the negative descriptors, and you make something overly positive and present it in terms of what is over positive to the person that you're presenting to. So in reaction to a sense of being rejected or abandoned, you could become very seductive and attempt to pull somebody in, but those expressions are all inauthentic. Or you could become bullying, which is the more forceful reaction to the experience of it, of feeling rejected, which is underneath the feeling of rejection is the abandonment terror. Make sense? Preoccupied people, on the other hand, grow up in a chaotic environment and don't monitor so well. Whereas dismissing people are over monitoring and always rehearsing what they're going to say and always intending what they say to provide the effect that they want, which is not an authentic expression of what you want, but an agenda toward getting what you want without having to be authentic. Preoccupied people, because they don't monitor, they just keep presenting one thing or another to get what they want, but that's a loop for them. I pretend to take care of you, not because I want to take care of you and you to be well taken care of, but because I want you to take care of me in the way that I need to be taken care of. And the abandonment terror is the thing that drives that. They're quite conscious of that abandonment terror. And sometimes they can mentalize well enough to know what their authentic expression is, but often the authentic expression is lost, and they're simply throwing up one inauthentic thing after another to try and elicit the care that they want. Disorganized people, the abandonment terror has also an accompanying fearfulness to it, which is really about harm. They're really frightened about being harmed by someone. And so they don't present themselves authentically because they think that if they reveal themselves authentically, they're making themselves vulnerable to harm. That makes sense. So,
Yeah, I just realized I'm disorganized, I think, because I was like, well, I feel like anxious, but the way I want them to take care of me is leave me alone.
right,
Yeah, I was just thinking all of that. That makes sense for the first time. Thank you.
good. One of the things that you'll notice in disorganized people is that toward the beginning of the 30s or into the mid 30s, because the accumulated disappointment of relationships not working very well, there's a move to withdraw from attempting to have them anymore, which is really a kind of withdrawal into the sense of self. And in some sense, it's a hunkering down just to wait it out. And and then there's an engagement in a lot of activities which are really auto-regulating in their structure rather than exploring. But it does produce a high level of pain. Social isolation is really painful. One of the things about disorganized people is that they're in a high level of pain most of the time, and they don't really have an understanding of what the source of the pain is. But the source of the pain is social isolation, because they're not really built for social isolation. And the way out of the pain of that social isolation is to connect to somebody, and that extreme isolation, and then the connection to somebody who actually appears to be listening and interested, is what causes these eruptions of the expression of intimacies, which often exceed the permissions that they have. And so there's often this sense of being overexposed to somebody because of the gushing nature of the expression in the beginning, which actually reinforces the withdrawal. It's like shaking a bottle of soda and opening the top, and it just all sort of gushes out in an uncontrolled way. The disorganized people are not wrong about the difficulty and danger of their early childhood experience. Where this breaks down is that you don't realize that not all people are going to be harmful. The social isolation really works against finding people who will not be harmful, though, because the barriers to get to know somebody are so elaborate in disorganized people. The only people that really break through are perpetrators. They're the ones who have the time and interest in doing it. And people who would expect a normal level of discourse don't stick around for it, because you don't provide that side to it. So and then you find yourself in a place where your belief that people will be harmful is reinforced, because the only people that persist enough to make contact are people that tend to be harmful. So another way to put that is disorganized people tend to relate to disorganized people, and they're unreliable and unboundaried, and don't really have a sensitivity to consent much. And that's because in their early childhood experiences, their consent was violated over and over again. So it never really registers that it's something to pay attention to. And you don't really have the expectation that somebody will respect a boundary anyway. Makes sense. So the way to come out of this is to understand what your authentic expression is, really pay attention to the levels of consent that you have, and begin a process of learning to express yourself authentically within the framework of the consent in the relationship, both what you've given and what the other person has given. The abandonment anxiety arises, and then you move to a place of regulating the abandonment terror. If you can do that, what happens is you move into a place of security, because you've represented yourself authentically and the other people have responded. And so you actually begin to open up the possibility of being seen for who you are and what is really happening to you. And if they stick around and actually value the consents that you've given, that actually creates the sense of security in a relationship. And that anxiety, that fearfulness actually settles in those relationships. And it's a slow pace that we do this in. When I talk about this, I talk about it in stages. There's 4 basic things that you need as a foundation, and then you can build a relationship on top of that. I like to call it fellow travelers in this life. It's wonderful to go through life with people that you can connect to and feel safe with, and have a long experience of them. So in the beginning, of course, what matters is that they're emotionally regulating for you. And this is an unconscious, automatic process of exchanging empathetically your experience with each other and coming into a place of emotional balance. So the most important thing for you, because what relationships are meant to do is support your capacity to explore, is that the person is emotionally regulating for you. So you pay attention to that. Once you have a good sense that in a lot of different circumstances, and this is over a couple of months if you're starting a new relationship, they're regulating for you. The next thing you need to find out is, do you regulate them? And you have a lot of options here. They could be regulating for you and you could be dysregulating for them. They could be regulating for you and they could not really have much in the way of regulation from you. Only if they're also regulated by you and you're regulated by them is there the opening for a long-lasting relationship, because any combination that isn't both of you being regulated, the relationship doesn't have legs and won't endure. Then what you have to figure out is, do you like to take care of them in the way that they need to be taken care of? And the reason that this is important is, if you don't like to take care of them in the way that they need to be taken care of, you won't do enough of it and they won't feel taken care of and they will complain and it will derail the relationship eventually. And then you have to figure out, will they take care of you in the way that you need to be taken care of? And often what this is collaborative, because it may not be obvious in the ways that each of you have to take care of each other in order to feel taken care of. And so you have to explore the different ways of taking care of each other so that it really works. If they like to take care of you, then you'll feel well taken care of. And if they don't like to do it, they won't do enough of it, and you won't feel taken care of. And you will complain about not being taken care of. The relationship won't succeed. If that foundation is there, then you can begin to look at, is my primary exploration lined up enough with their primary exploration? There's actually a synergy that happens between them, and they're mutually supporting and mutually reinforcing, so that you're actually out in the world discovering the things that you need to know, and then you can come rushing back and tell them what you found out, and they can go out and explore and come rushing back and tell you what they found out. And that energy of the exchange of exploration is the thing that really carries relationships over years and decades. And if you don't have all of that, they get stale. And that exploration piece is really what enlivens them. Is that all making sense? But in order to do that, you have to be free to be authentic. And in a relationship that's really solid, you feel free to express anything, even if there is some abandonment anxiety activated by it. But you don't think that the relationship is going to collapse because you've let them see you. Is that making sense? Adam?
I know there's a lot to these questions. It means essentially why we're all here, but how do you discover and understand what your authentic expression is? And then how do you move through the abandonment terror and then ultimately the terrible sadness?
Well, the easiest litmus test is, if you say something and there's no abandonment terror, it's inauthentic.
Fuck.
And if you say something and there's huge abandonment terror, it's likely to be authentic.
Great. Get it, dog.
Now, it is likely that if it's huge abandonment terror, you're going to say the inauthentic thing, which will relieve the abandonment terror, and then you'll have this tiny window of opportunity to correct yourself.
Yep.
The faster you correct yourself, the easier it is. You could correct yourself in 15 seconds and there would be no blowback. If you wait 2 days, you might not be able to fix it. So there's that.
I totally understand that. Yes. Okay.
And then don't forget that if you express yourself authentically and you get a good response for it, it's reinforcing. And then what is the level of authenticity that you've agreed to? Now, I do not recommend that you say, listen, we have to have a conversation. I've been lying to you since the very beginning of our relationship. Everything you know about me is not true. All of the agreements we've made, I've lied about. This is not something that is survivable by the other person. So what you have to say is, listen, I know that I made this agreement, and you have to then voice what the agreement is. And but it's not sitting that well with me anymore, and I would like to change it. Everybody will accept that because everybody has the experience of that, right? So can we renegotiate that? And so you begin a process of moving from inauthenticity to authenticity. There is no world where you throw off the cloak of inauthenticity and stand there in your sequence and the other person says, great, I've been waiting. I've been waiting for this. There is no, they see through the inauthenticity and want your true self because they've bought hook, line, and sinker the inauthenticity. And that needs to be managed, really. And you're moving toward it, not it's too unfair. And one of the things that you have to pay attention to is, and this is more true for secure people than insecure people, insecure people don't really use inauthenticity particularly, and their epistemic trust in you comes at the cost of if you lie to me and I can't tell that you're lying, I can't trust you. And they don't have a good facility for that. Whereas insecure and disorganized people, are really talented or really, let's say, skillful in inauthenticity. And so they can make sense of it in a way that's better than secure people can. Adam?
And correct me if I'm wrong, but this also applies to some degree to not only intimate relationships, but other relationships as well. Yeah.
All of them. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. And you mentioned your training in the trainings before. What trainings did you take when you were talking about the couple?
Oh yeah. That was the PACT Institute training for couples therapy. To work with, when you if you form a relationship that's inauthentic, one or both people in the relationship have made all of these inauthentic agreements that are the basis of the relationship, or as you undertake doing your attachment repair, and you decide that you want to begin to change the agreements of the relationship, sometimes you need a referee to help with the negotiation, because it can be too frightening to do it without a referee. So the couples therapy from the PACT Institute is really about a referee and people negotiating from a inauthentic basis of relationship to an authentic relationship, authentic basis for relationship. But the main, what you'll notice at the beginning of doing this is that you make the intention to move into an authentic expression, and then you'll begin to see how conditioned you are, and how some areas are really hard and some aren't. I use the metaphor of that old PC game Minesweeper. I don't know if you remember it. It's a grid, and there's mines underneath it. And if you click on a mine, the game is over. But if you click next to a mine, it gives you a number that points to the number of squares that are surrounding the mine. Anyway, sometimes you click on a square and half the board opens up. And sometimes you click on a square and all of the squares around you have a high number and you're in peril. And all of our inauthenticity is based on actual conditioning, right? And some childhood experiences are really painful and difficult, and that creates a lot of pressure for inauthenticity around it. And some are not a big deal, and so they open up. So you'll notice that you can make an authentic expression, and there's not that much blowback. And sometimes it's really hard to move forward into an authentic expression in some areas. But you do it 1 time, 10 times, 100 times, and each time the abandonment terror is diminished until you can be effortlessly authentic, and there's no blowback. There's no resistance to doing it because you have enough of a positive response from doing it that becomes the expectation rather than the expectation that you'll be abandoned. Makes sense? Why don't we do some meditation? Right, let go of the meditation. How's that? Chris?
Some of the things you were talking about earlier, like being the authentic self, seems scary because, like, if I'm my authentic self and then that is what gets rejected and not my pretend self gets rejected, then who cares? So my authentic self gets rejected. That's scary.
Right.
And it makes it seem like, God damn, this is a lot of work and this is hard. But this meta, particularly when I'm in the metaphor self, it's like, oh, this feels good. I like it here. This is a nice space. Like, maybe I can actually do this thing.
Oh, good.
Yeah. So it's kind of, I don't know, it's kind of easy for me to generate that mind space. And then I think it's also take a long time and a lot of practice to just have that as my natural state. But it's nice in there.
I'm glad. And you did bring up one of the things I don't think I touched on, which is if you present yourself and it has nothing to do with you, really, you get rejected, who cares?
Yeah. So what? That wasn't the idea.
But I will talk about it when we talk about the terrible sadness, because actually that's the thing that plunges you into the terrible sadness if you take the risk of expressing yourself authentically and you get rejected. You just sink into that terrible sadness, and the defenses against that are epic in people that have a hard time with that. Good. Someone else? Adam?
That was one of the man over short, but that was one of the best sits for loving kindness I've had in a really, really long time.
Oh, good.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Thank you.
So, we have a couple of things coming up. One is an exploration workshop at the end of October, which is, I'm going to talk about creative processes, mainly as an illustration, my own progression of photographic work from the last 45 years. So hopefully that will be fun and entertaining. And then in November, we have a workshop which I'm calling Family Archaeology, Home for the Holidays, so that can really talk about strategies for going home and using it as a way of really beginning to understand your relationship to your family and how maybe to navigate it so that it's more satisfying, actually, to participate in the family system. And then that really takes us to the end of the year. We'll begin a whole cycle next year of level 1s and level 2s, and we're going to continue doing the level 2 addiction classes because I think that was worked well. And so that stuff will begin to appear on our website. Thanks for your practice. Really appreciate it. If you're resourced and can make a donation, we really appreciate that. It helps support me and also the work Mettagroup is doing. There's a link to make a donation on the website, and we'll see you soon somewhere on the path, I hope. Bye.